Good morning. The next part of my chapter mainly happens in Houston, which down there we call H-Town. But first, something I forgot to mention real quick. The last semester of being in college, I went on a Living World Religions field trip, which I would recommend to anyone in the world, where we visited a Buddhist temple, Muslim mosque, a Sikh temple, a Baha'i temple, a Jewish synagogue, a Sikh temple. I don't know if I re-mentioned any of them or missed one, but basically just familiarize yourself not just by reading about, but by visiting places of worship of people of all different living world religions. That was one of my favorite things that I looked forward to, and then was really glad I did in college. And I think about that trip all the time because because it was amazing and very enlightening, and a lot to try to understand. You don't understand all of it, and so you think about it again and again. Every time you learn something new about any of that, you think back to that and plug it into what you experienced there. Well, so I mentioned Pioneer Bible Translators and how I was planning on joining them, and I started that process, and the things that I found out, just about how it is in different parts of the world, surprised me. And like, for example, just how it is in like shamanism and animism, things like that, and missionaries go and live in places where that is the main worldview of people, and I was really fascinated by that, and I didn't go at that time, though I started the process, and I never quite understood all the reasons why. I just vaguely didn't feel I was ready, and I had a couple of reasons that I would tell myself and other people, like, oh well, I'm just taking it slow, or one big one was my parents are getting older and I don't want to be away from them for that long. But I don't think that was really it, because missionaries go overseas for a long time, and they have furlough, and they come back and visit, and actually I spent most of the next 5 years away from my parents, only seeing them on video. So that couldn't have been it exactly. I didn't like the idea of raising financial support, going around and hitting up all my friends for that to be a missionary. But I mean, I had majored in missions in college, so I didn't really understand myself. It's more like I was really nervous about doing missions and all the things involved in it, but I had always wanted to study and understand these things, and I really did want to go see for myself and do something positive out there, and I believed in this mission of translating the Bible. Anyways, hopefully that's not too much on that again, but I kept coming back to that in my life. Again, there'll be a time I come back to that in the next chapter. So I spent the following 5 years or so, 6 years, in H-Town, and I went back to the church that I loved so much there, that I still consider home. So H is not just for Houston for me, it's for hometown. And I won't describe the church there again, because I already did in my last chapter, I think it was. But wonderful, diverse church, a lot of very humble people, wonderful ministry staff that's also very diverse. Here I am describing the church again. It's hard not to. That was my whole life during this time. I made a couple of friends there who I actually hadn't known yet, who became my best friends during this time. Spent so much time together. I did a job that was parking cars at the Texas Medical Center there in Houston, and I did that for I don't even like to say it. I did that for 5 years, but I actually loved doing that. But it wasn't because that's what I wanted to do with my life. it was a couple things. One was this sense of me having my life on hold and not knowing what to do. But the other was I had yet another amazing new experience there. It wasn't just the cars, although I did get to drive and park and guard thousands of cars, including all kinds of cars I never thought I would drive in my life. But I did that working with my coworkers, who were some pretty fascinating people. They were people from the barrios and hoods of Houston, people from countries all over the Middle East and all over Africa. And that was an experience I never had and have not since. And I really loved that. I actually, during this time, I rented a room from an older Mexican lady who grew up like out in the country in Mexico and didn't speak a lick of English, and I could barely understand her Spanish. About, I don't know, maybe 30%, but we talked every day. and I was very involved in the church, in the English and Spanish parts of the church. I'd go every week to a home for people with various disabilities, and that was one of my favorite things. Just my little group that that was kind of our small group, was we would do that. The Living World Religions field trip, I had visited all these different places of worship of other religions, but I'd never really been to many different Christian places of worship. But in college, I had learned about the early church, as I've mentioned, more than I was aware of before. I studied the first 1,000 years of church history and realized, oh, the church was like totally more than I thought it was, and was in more cultures. Like, it wasn't just the Catholic Church, it wasn't just Europe. It was Africa and Asia had big Christian presence, and it wasn't just that the Catholic Church like ruled over them or something. They had their own churches, and we're descended like from the European civilization, and we don't talk about them as much. And for a long time they've lived under Muslim rule. So I'm not trying to do a history thing here, but I learned some of this in college. But then for the first time at this job, I worked with a lot of African Orthodox Christians, and I'd never even heard of that. It's related to the It's related to the Coptic Church. They're part of the same church. But in Ethiopia, they have a very interesting expression of that. And a friend of mine, who I'm friends with online here somewhere, who theoretically could watch this at some point, you're one of my best friends. I love you forever. So glad he accidentally slammed my finger in a door of a car one day because we became friends, and he had me over to his house a few times. He had me to his church a few times. Go to an Ethiopian Orthodox church. Like, this is the origin. Like, do you like the colors? The red, yellow, and green, like the Rastafari, all of that. That all goes back to Ethiopia and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But that's not like my main. I had this really surreal trip of learning about all this, starting with going to this church and seeing how Africans worship, and like actually bowing down with their face to the ground when they worship. And I was like, I thought only Muslims did that. By the way, I made great friends with some Muslims too during this time, who also had me to their houses, and some of the most amazing people I've ever met. Also know some of you could watch this in theory. So glad I met you guys. So glad to have had that experience. Hope that's not over, because it's been a few years now. Never thought that parking cars would be the time that I didn't just study other cultures, but actually lived in them. And that's one reason. It was so hard for me to leave that. I finally did, and one of the reasons was because my health problems kept getting worse. It started with the digestive disorder flaring up. That happened a few times. I got hospitalized every time. And then my knees, I was doing this very active on my feet job. One thing I didn't mention ever yet is that I always ran everywhere in my life. As a kid, as a teenager, in college, I ran everywhere, and I ran at this car parking. Yes, that means valet job. And at this time, my knees started to wear down, and had serious problems with them. And I thought it was as a result of the medical condition I had, and finally had to stop running. I used to dream every night, as my dad also has told me that he did his whole life. I would dream, in the night I would have dreams of flying, and in the day I would run. Well, during this time I stopped running because I couldn't anymore, and my dreams changed from flying to running, which was so depressing to me because it's never really gone back to flying. It's mostly running. So I guess it's because if I could run again, it would be like flying now. But I went through like a lot of denial and then grief of this happening and losing this part of my life. But I've recovered a bit, thankfully. But I didn't know that it was one of the medicines I was taking for my condition that was actually the main culprit in that happening. Anyway, don't want to launch into all that, but that happened. That was like a big thing in this time of my life. Living in Houston, my knees just slowly giving out on me, and me thinking I'm going to end up in a wheelchair. I got LASIK eye surgery, and of all things, those were the people who immediately knew, oh, this medicine you're taking is going to compromise the surgery. You can't get LASIK unless you quit this medicine for a year. I was like, how did my other doctors not know that this medicine was affecting me like this? So I asked my doctor, is there some way I can do something besides this medicine? He's like, oh, you can quit it. I'm like, what? I didn't even have to be why was I even taking this medicine? Okay, anyway, side story, not my main story. That's one of the big frustrations in life. That was one of the big why did this happen to me, things in my life. I could still have good knees right now. But all of that happened, and if I'd been more inquisitive, but I was actually in a bad place of mind during all this, and it's a lot of things involved in that, but a lot of it's just that the very toxic upbringing that I and my family went through. I had a rest from it for a while, but then finally, not being directly under that pressure, the effects that it had on me started coming out, and same goes for my whole family. So, I just had very, very poor, very poor confidence, but also just very negatively down on myself all the time. I've always been positive toward other people and very negative toward myself. That's something I really had to struggle with. And I know that's not rare. A lot of people struggle with that. And I think for a lot of the same spiritual and existential reasons that I've already touched on. And so that's actually been a big part of the quest of my own journey in life, is to understand why things were this way for me and why they are this way for other people, because it's getting more and more complicated, it seems, and we're all dealing with it. Well, I got off that medicine. A year later, I got my LASIK surgery. my knees quit progressing so badly, degenerating so badly, but they were still too bad for me to keep up what I was doing. I tried something different. It was such a difficult and also such a wonderful time of my life. That's the one place where I really felt like this was my home and I chose it. The one place I've lived that I decided to live there. I had my own people. But then 2020 happened, throwing a wrench in everything for everyone in the world again. And I also, during that time, decided to join Pioneer Bible Translators again, which is where the next chapter starts, and that's the last chapter because it comes up to the present.